Well, look, I mean, I come from a very strong family of individuals who were first in their category. My dad is still my roommate who moved in with me after the death of my mom a couple of years ago, who's a three-star retired general and the first of his kind to be comptroller of the Army and to run the largest budget for the government. My mom was named by President Clinton as principal of the year. She was first African American female that my mom went to Columbia and danced at the Apollo. We don't know if there was a pole involved or anything, so we try not to share that story too broadly, but that's how she got through her master's at Columbia. And my dad was at Penn at a time when, even though with graduating from an Ivy League institution, he couldn't be accepted as an officer in the military. He came in as a non-commissioned officer. So it's been a family that has really introduced me to sort of those first two moments. And growing up with that, there was the expectation that I too could be first. So I never thought I couldn't be because I saw what it looked like for people to break through a barrier or a ceiling. I also felt the responsibility that came with that. Coco, you were so generous in suggesting this sort of keep your arms open as you walk, that you bring people with you. It's what I experienced my entire life. My parents did that, and there's so many people I still meet whose careers have been changed and lives have been changed because they extended their net. They passed and shared their mic, they shared their platform, and they extended their influence to make sure that others could be part of a new opportunity. Look, I also think there's accountability. I say my mom, before there was a Tiger mom, there was my mom. She had absolutely no problem with putting all of the pressure of being the only Black or the only female put it all on me. Even at the age of 8, I think winning the spelling bee was like, yes, you represent all Black people and all women. Okay, so I'm 8. I'm thinking maybe that's a bit of pressure, but she pushed super hard, but she didn't push without a safety net. So she pushed really hard, but we knew, all of us, my siblings as well, that we had a safety net. But there was this belief, and we talk about when you can visualize somebody breaking through a barrier, when you've seen it, it makes it so much easier for you to believe that it's possible. And that's what I appreciate about the family that I grew up in.
When you say you had a safety net, what did that mean?
So the family safety, we literally have a family code, which is a little concerning, that we can all kind of like name that tune. We can all sort of quote the different life tenets that were part of our family. But safety net living was say that push as far as you can, but if you fail at anything, this is a family that wraps its arms around you, gets you back on your feet. Of anyone in the family, we've done a family call for 32 years every month, the extended family. We wrap our arms around and provide that sort of trampoline, like you fall and you bounce right back up, whether that's financial, whether that's psychological support, whether that's spiritual or faith-based. It's a family that believes in safety nets. And so because you know you have the safety net, you can take more chances and more risks, maybe.
I love that. And Toni, maybe that's a great way of thinking about alternatives to not having financial safety nets. We'll come back to that. Did you always, know that you would one day be a CEO? Was that going to be your path?
I didn't. I would say I always thought that I would lead something. I don't know if I knew it would be a business or I never necessarily said I just want to be a CEO at some age in my career. I think about 10, 15 years ago when I stepped into more senior management, I realized I kind of got the lure past me that this is possible. Like I started to engage at the CEO level and realized that I could do that role, but I don't think I kind of grew up with as a fire in the belly. It was more that I wanted to lead and that I knew the responsibility of leadership and the accountability of leadership, but I was willing to take those kinds of risks so that I could lead. I love teams. I love building high performance teams. And it's a lot like sports for me, which I love as well. And I've played so many sports all my life that's such a comfortable experience that being a leader on a team, being a coach, all of that, I thought that's what I want to do. The fact that it ended up being in the corporate world was sort of where I landed, but I didn't really have gosh, I want to be a CEO at a certain date.
So talk to us a little bit about pivotal moments that shaped you in becoming that CEO.
Yeah, look, pivotal moments that shaped Toni for preparedness for CEO. I think getting into the box, the way we talk about it in the military, you can work really hard to make colonel, but you don't make general unless you're invited in. you're invited in to be a general, to be a flag officer. You have to be sponsored in, no matter how good you are. And so there's a little bit of sponsoring in that happens, I think, at the CEO level, but I'll tell you some of the pivotal moments just to get ready for and maybe be regarded as viable as a CEO. I think even just coming right out of college, the decision to do Peace Corps, it sounds so pedantic, but when I graduated from Princeton, I had a full ride from my MBA, already kind of landed a scholarship. And I chose to go and live on the equator for 3 years in the Peace Corps, which most, my family was still wondering if I had fallen and hit my head. They were all wondering if something had happened, like what in the world? And yet for me, that cross-cultural moment of getting outside of the pack and going directly to get a master's degree and doing something that was more consistent with my family value of service. Everybody in my family had to serve. We're a military family. I chose not to serve in the military, but I did choose to serve in the Peace Corps. That changed, it shaped even some of the things I learned about myself, some of the things I learned about living overseas cross-culturally. I've used almost all of those lessons in every aspect of my career. Lessons about my own bias, lessons about situational awareness, absolutely. Lessons about cultural communications. And so I think that was one of those moments where I went against the path. People thought I was either sort of a saint or an idiot, and I was neither. I just wanted a different experience. I think the decision I was at Arthur Andersen when Arthur Andersen shut down as a company, and I had a choice at that point as to whether I was going to stay in management consulting at the kind of the high end of that or start to work the tech stack. And I made a conscious hard turn towards tech. Now I joined a server company. I mean, I went infrastructure. I went about as far as you could go on that turn. I went to Unisys that was trying to go up market. But from that point forward, I started to work the tech stack from infrastructure to system integration at CGI, to software at Microsoft. I kind of worked back my way up to the consulting layer. I also made some decisions to not just do federal government and state and local government, but to go into regulated industries, financial services, healthcare, utilities, energy. As I went into broader regulated industries, it changed my perspective. And I was starting to see the convergence of various sectors and the technology that supported that convergence. So I think those were some key decisions. Probably my last one that I'll highlight. The decision to do Microsoft was interesting, to leave one Washington and go to the other. I'll tell you, I had just made president of CGI. I really had a phenomenal job. I had just been promoted into the job. I was 3 months in when Microsoft came calling. And they really only met with me because they loved my Rolodex. They were like, hey, do you know any other leaders that we could find for public sector? I was giving them names. And all of a sudden they said, wait a minute, what about? And that's how it started. That decision came at a very pivotal point where I had to ask my family, as we did a family meeting, they said it's mama time. That's what the kids called it, mama time, which is you go ahead and leave, go to the other coast. This is your time to go big, go global. And I did. And I mean, I circumnavigated the globe for the next 3 years. It was phenomenal. And so I think that was probably a pivotal moment before coming back to SAIC to really go as big as possible.
So, Toni, were there points? I even think when you said, you were giving them lots of names, but you didn't give them your name. And then they said, what about you, Toni? Was there a point, let me just kind of tee it up, is lots of women here may feel, I'm a division head. I've got lots of cross-functional C-suite leadership skills. I want to be a CEO. Was there a point where you knew you were ready and yet you were struggling to be CEO recognized?
Yeah, I think I make that distinction a lot between, there are so many phenomenal women that I see that are ready, that are just simply not recognized. And this is part of the systemic bias we still have in that CEO suite. So let me just say that readiness, after I had run a $16.5 billion portfolio at Microsoft for about 3 years and had the fastest growing part of Microsoft under my leadership, I had to make a decision about, was I ready? And I felt like I talked to some external mentors. I also went to one of the top recruiting, sort of talent recruiting, headhunter kind of organizations. And I asked them, give me a profile. If you looked at me, how would you position me for a CEO opportunity? And I got really tough feedback. I mean, it was like, well, you're not reporting directly to Satya, the CEO, so that's going to take a point away, but you are managing a large P&L. Like they gave me sort of the plus delta of how I lined up. And they said, pretty much a $5 to $10 billion organization, you're ready. You got it. Particularly if it's in this sector, these regulated industries, you probably could operate. If you're back in government where you started your career, you would be an absolute candidate. So they gave me the profile. I got the externals. I felt like I was ready. I left Microsoft, and for some reason I thought, okay, the phone is going to start ringing. Like, here we go. I'm just going to wait, and here it comes in. And it didn't happen. It didn't happen. I left Microsoft in March of 2022, and it did not happen. I joined boards, really cool boards. I was already on the NASDAQ board, as you know, Coco, but also I joined boards in regulated industries. So I was on Johns Hopkins. I was for the healthcare side of it. I was on Marathon Petroleum in the gas and regulated energy. I joined a government board, a private equity-backed organization, just so I could learn the PE side of the world. And I was, started to enjoy board time, and I was on 8 boards, and that was it. I was kind of on my path, and I questioned, did I miss something? Like, okay, the boards are great. I enjoy the board work, but did I just miss a window? And maybe I was too old. Maybe I started to question myself in lots of different directions. So I do think that this period of time where you're ready, or you believe you're ready, or you feel strongly confident, and yet you haven't been recognized, there are some things I learned about how you get your name out there, how you offer up your own resume to some of the large header, that there are CEO whisperers, if you will, that help companies figure out who might be available for a slate. And I just kind of kept my name out there. And then I got a call from, I think he sounded like he was about 15 years old. A recruiter called. I was about to hang up. And he said, ma'am, literally, ma'am, I'm calling on behalf of Heidrick, and we really want you to, and I thought he was on like a summer internship. I was like, what? Who gave you my number? How old are you? Like, I have grandchildren here. And so, but I said, let me just go ahead and call, because I knew Heidrick. I actually called the head of Heidrick. I'm like, who's the little kid you had call me? And they were like, oh, he's one of our new hires. And then got the call and said, hey, we're doing an external search. And Coco, I just want to say this, because I think this is important for the women on this call. As you know, generally when they're doing a search, they can't tell you the name of the company. They just describe, everybody's been through that. You get the description and you slowly figure out what the company is, but they can't necessarily share that up front. As they described the company, I realized what company it was. And it was one of the very, very few companies. In fact, on one hand, I can name the companies in this industry, in the gov tech, gov defense industry, that was run by a female CEO. So my first response was, if this is a planned exit from this individual, I also knew that I knew her. I knew the CEO. I'd worked with her before, and she was a friend. So the first question I said was, I'm not interested in this search unless this is a planned exit initiated by the current CEO. If this is anything else, hang in there. Good luck with that. I think sometimes it's also good to just have some solidarity on understanding what it means when there are so few women in a place, in an industry, of what it means to say, hey, if this is her call, I'm happy to be considered. If you all are doing something else, I think I'll hold back, because I'm not going to challenge that in that way. And so I share that only to say that there's so few of us. At some point, we all have to kind of lock arms on some things. And as you all have seen, with Roz, who was phenomenal, who left Walgreens, and other leaders in the Fortune 500, I'm not going to speak out of turn, but I will say it is a tough market, and people are not always straightforward. And we have to just have some rules on how we engage as women in this space. And so I did make the call, and I went up to New York and made my pitch, and the rest is kind of history.
And Toni, there is a question here about mentors along the way, mentorship, sponsorship. I sort of hesitate from that, because I myself don't have a mentor or think about 5 mentors. But it sounds like you have solidarity, and you also have people who on so many different levels pushed you up, pulled you forward, helped you out. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I've had different groups of individuals along the path. And so, like you, I don't have a single mentor. I think of mentorship and sponsorship as a portfolio play. I have a portfolio of mentors that help me in different ways at different times. Some of them are career type mentors that help me at every stage of my career. Some of them are subject matter kind of around when I'm going into a certain industry. So I have mentors by industry as well. When I'm stepping into healthcare, when I'm stepping into financial services, people I call and can help me understand the lay of the land and challenge my thinking. I have a prayer circle of former CEOs that every month they currently pray with me every month about things that are hard to understand. I happen to be a faith-based person, and so there's a lot that I work through with prayer, and I happen to have some former CEOs that pray with me monthly because I can talk to them and pray with them about certain things I can't necessarily share with my family. I'm in a national security company, and so, but I can talk to them about certain things, and so, and they've been there. They sat in the seat, and so I think you create a personal portfolio of mentors and sponsors, and obviously we know the difference. I also have sponsors. In fact, one would argue that the chairman of the board of SAIC, Donna Maria, who was my boss for a moment, she hired me into CGI early in my career. She stayed as a mentor, but she also, in many ways, was a sponsor. When I wanted to understand the private equity community, she was at Carlyle and she immediately plugged me in to understand. Sponsors put something on the table for you. They take a risk. They are moving things out of the way so that you can move forward, or they're bringing you into new opportunities. And so I have a combination of both. And I think you got to work it like a portfolio of
Yeah.
people that help you in different ways at different times. And of course, the reverse is true. Please be there for other people as a mentor or sponsor. I think it's got to be a bilateral.
Let's talk about how is being now you're a CEO. How is being the CEO different than anything you've experienced at this point?
Well, I'll tell you, half the time, the first month, I kept looking around for who my boss was. Like every once in a while, I'd be like, okay, I got to get this done and I need to submit it to, and then it was like, oh, I'm submitting it to myself. Like there is no one, I'd be looking over my shoulder like who? And I never saw myself as CEO. The three letters have a power to them. And you're kind of almost having an out of body experience, like going up on the elevator. People are like, gosh, there's a new CEO. And I just joined them. I'm like, tell me about it. Just having fun on the elevator. And then they look up, they're like, it's you. And I would say, yeah, I just kind of wanted to hear what you were saying about her. And I've just been sort of poking at what those three letters combined mean to people. And sort of, I come from a family of nouns. Everybody in my family was a noun. They were a soldier, they were a teacher, a pilot, a doctor, and I was never a noun. Like they would have to make up things at the family meeting to explain what I did, because how do you make a noun, right? I didn't have a noun. So they were like, oh, I think she's like a telemarketer. She sells things. She's on the phone. They didn't have a great noun. And so now I have a noun. So I've been wanting to be a noun for a long time, just so I could join my family. And so now I have a noun. So that's been helpful. I do think that the feeling is one of immediate total accountability. The closest thing I can connect it to is when my first child, I think once you have one, you kind of know this is coming, but my first child, when they kind of placed him on me after he was born, and I'm thinking, I'm it for this kid. Like I am it. Like his entire life capability, his existence is me. If I don't get my act together, he's just going to be a total mess. Now I can still ask about that kid who's now 30, whatever, how well we did. That's a different conversation. But that sense of total accountability, you feel that you're always on, you feel that. But I think the most exciting part of the CEO role is the ability to affect culture, the ability to come to an organization, change the pace, change the language and taxonomy, respect their legacy, and derive something new that is both respectful but also innovative around their culture. So I've been focusing on 4 pivots since I joined the organization around their portfolio, the go-to-market, the brand, and the culture. And probably the most fun I've had has been on the culture side. What are the pivots that are needed for us to move this company forward? And that's something uniquely you can do as a CEO that I haven't seen the effect of that in any other role I've had to date.
I love it. I'm gonna turn it to Suja and other questions in a minute, but I just want to skip the list a little bit. I want to talk to you about the board and your relationship with the board. But before we go there, there's this interesting question that I think ties back to the prayer circle of CEOs that you mentioned. Someone in chat asked about role models for CEOs, and SAIC uses advanced and emerging technology to enable defense and military services. And you are doing this in a very dynamic, let's call it scary time in global geopolitics and society with AI, as we were just talking about. And SAIC is you're as a company, you're performing at an all-time high, you're doing great. When you think about what is a great CEO, particularly in the context of what you operate in, what is it?
Well, look, I think what I know it isn't is a singularly threaded individual with singular monolithic metrics. It is dimensional and dynamic, meaning at any given time, I'm operating around sort of a hub and spoke of how I engage with my board, how I position the company either on the Hill in the political environment, with our other stakeholders, investors and others, how I'm engaging with the teams, how I'm spending time with the customers themselves. And my customers are in not only the government arena, but in national security and mission critical operations. This is what makes SAIC such a dynamic company. I sit at the intersection of some of the coolest emerging technology that I've experienced at Microsoft and other places, but it's in a real-time mission environment. This is absolutely applied innovation at the edge with real-time operations that affect the security of this country in a very physical manifestation as well as in a digital manifestation. And so you feel the weight of that and the urgency of that. I've got a C-SPAN rolling, in my office because every decision that's being made affects some parts of my company. When I walked into this office, I started on October 2nd, and you all know what occurred in Gaza, what had already occurred in Ukraine. I spent all night thinking about what would I say to my company relative to Gaza and the role. And as a public CEO, there were many that came out publicly. As a national security company, we have to be careful. We have people in theater. What we say can put people at risk. And so you're constantly engaging in what is the posture and position of a company. How do you depoliticize things that have become super politicized? We manage the border. We manage technology around border stations. How many people have been hearing about the border? It's sort of the fodder of all media right now. So we are sitting in very politicized areas where part of my job is to depoliticize our role to ensure that we are driving the mission of our customers. And quite frankly, with national imperatives, addressing some of the major national imperatives that we're facing. And so, what does a good CEO look like? I think it looks like a balanced individual. It looks like a dynamic individual that's got to make some threshold decisions and trade-offs to position the company, to grow the company in a sustainable, profitable way. But it's not just that you grow, it's how you grow and the decisions you make. I'm in a company that's 55 years old. That started with it was the first ESOP or employee-owned company of its kind. It has an amazing legacy, very entrepreneurial, but I've been also trying to drive an enterprise mindset because we trade under one symbol, as you know. But fundamentally, it's a company that takes on some of the most complex problems facing this country and hasn't done it with a lot of bravado, but quietly has just basically taken on tough stuff. And so part of being a good CEO is to remind the company that we're really an asset of this country. And I've been telling all of them, hey, you're a national asset, which means we got to raise our game, got to introduce our tech, we've got to use open system architecture and plug and play. We've got to be gritty and light blue collar when necessary. We've got to be at the edge in real-time mission critical operations. And so that's, I think, part of what drives the CEO role is a little bit of the halo effect that you should create for your company.
That's beautifully said, Toni. Suja, did you want to jump in with
Yeah, there's a few questions lining up, Toni, and please, everyone attending, please line up your questions. So Megan is looking for, when you mentioned keeping your name out there, how did your actions play a role in the getting asked? Can you sort of connect the dots for us? I think you've shared a lot, very candid. Thank you. What approaches worked there? And what would you have done differently? What can we take away from that approach that you took, Toni?
Look, I made the decision, and again, I'll be super transparent. I made the decision to leave Microsoft. I had the best job, I thought, at Microsoft, to be honest. And I didn't see the next best job unless, getting into Satya's knickers there didn't make sense, even though my mom told everybody I was CEO of Microsoft for many, many years, lots of confused communications. She just believed I was the CEO. So I was very comfortable in making the decision to leave. I stepped out, and honestly, for the next 10 weeks, I stepped out, and 3 days later, my mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. I became the CEO of her journey for the next 10 weeks until she passed. And so that was really a pre-CEO role. Trust me, she had a bucket list that I had to execute against it. It was a full CEO kind of primer for me with her. Dad moves in, and there I am trying to figure out what's next. And for that period of time, I reached out to all my mentors. I reached out to 3 executive search firms and made sure they knew that I was interested. I joined a couple of boards, as I mentioned, that kept me current in the industries that I had experience in. I went to conferences and tried to keep my industry associations. I kept my resume as current as possible. Those are the things that I did during that time. And really, for about a year, if I can get my timing right here, from at least March of 2022 to February of 2023, that's what I did for about a year. And at that point, I just assumed that maybe the CEO opportunity had passed me, or I wasn't going to be in the mix or in the run. And I started to get very comfortable in my board roles and started to enjoy that and worked on other projects. So I don't, again, when I mentioned it, I gave you the military example of being invited, to a certain extent, being sponsored in. There's only so much you're going to be able to do, but you want to be very clear about what sector, what size of business you're ready to run, what sector that you are most acclimated towards, public versus a private company. I knew that I was comfortable in a public company. Some people don't want the public exposure, the setting guidance to the street, the quarterly earnings calls. People don't want that. Know if you are better attuned to a public versus a private. Know the sizing, know the industry, know the culture. I also made it very clear to people that I focus heavily on organic growth. Know if you're an organic growth player or more of an acquisition and M&A kind of player. Kind of be able to characterize yourself. So what happened? The board of SAIC was looking to improve its organic growth. That's what I had already characterized myself in terms of my background has been very quickly, rapidly growing organically in companies. They wanted the change to be a culture-based change. I had highlighted my cultural transformations at Microsoft, CGI, Unisys, and other places. So in some ways, I had pitched and put out in the market what my profile was, and that profile was then matched as a real opportunity that then I had to go and make my own pitch and land that opportunity. So be clear, it's not just I want to be a CEO. CEO of what? What kind of company, what size company, what nature of the company, like get specific and granular and map your skill set against that. And then as much as we love looking in the mirror, and I look like Beyonce every time I look in the mirror, I know how good I look. Get someone else outside of our own mirror view to take a look at that and give you some feedback. Someone that's in the market. Generally, the executive search firms are great. Charles from, I can't think of his, the firm, but the guy who gave me the feedback, it was a tough call. I mean, I thought I looked better than, I was like, I think I'm ready to run a 20 billion. He was like, what are you talking about? So he's like, this is how we would pitch you. This is you want people that this is what they do to take a look at your profile and see how you would line up.
Superb.
Is that helpful? I don't know if that's
super helpful. And you have shared certainly the role of your family in your career. You've shared the role of your mentor, the chair of SAIC. There's a question here. Can you speak about some of the role models? I'm guessing your father is a role model, your family, but are there any other role models you can share in your path to your CEO? And how do you see yourself as a role model for others?
Well, I'll start with the end first in reverse order. I never see myself the way others do. I just don't. So when people say, oh, you're a role model, or I see you a certain way, I see generally all the flaws, probably more initially than I see why I'm in that particular perspective. But I've started to accept and step into this idea that at this stage of my career and at this platform, I've got to kind of put shoulders back and realize that people are watching and that I can be a role model for them in some areas. So I'm just coming into that level of understanding that I'm a role model. I still look around the room and say, who are you talking to? So, because I'm looking at the crazy grandma who's running around with the kids, and I'm looking at all the kind of craziness of my life, not the what looks very succinct to others. I will say, in terms of role models, clearly my family and many that I've seen, Satya really did help me. Satya Nadella has been an absolute role model in his humility in running Microsoft, just what it is to bring in a humility, his empathy, his willingness to learn and curiosity. I've really been so struck by that for one of the highest market cap organizations on the planet. He could take so many different postures, and the posture he continues to take is learning. So it's really helped me. Curiosity, he's helped me understand, and he's been wonderful. I will say that the only other person that's been a phenomenal role model for me has been Nelson Mandela. I don't know if there's a human on the planet that had more effect on me in terms of his leadership model and a national forgiveness model that I have never seen anywhere in any form. And I still hold myself to a different level. Every time I get through a week or a month that's tough, I think about what that man not only went through, but how he led a country. I'm still amazed by it. So he's been a role model as well.
Very well said, and such humility. We all look at you as role models, Toni. So certainly you are, and you can continue to guide us. I had a question on cybersecurity. This is my own question, and I don't know what you can and cannot share. So whatever you can, what are your perspectives about how we are addressing? This is a big topic. So it'll be interesting to pick your brains on the cyber threats, the FBI announcement in the last 24 hours of targeting of alien nations targeting the US infrastructure. Are we doing enough as private sector? Are we doing enough as public sector? Are we doing enough as government interventions? This has become sort of the never-ending story of threats and responses, but seems to be never a closing game. So just what are you, how do you think about it?
Yeah, look, I say it to folks here when I joined SAIC. You know, in the defense industrial base where SAIC started, threat was really a physical perimeter threat, right? This idea of the threat to our country and how do we put technology, embed technology and capability to determine that threat for the national, for the Department of Defense and intelligence agencies. Over the last, I would say, 2 decades, we acknowledge across if you've done anything in regulated industries, whether it's healthcare or financial services, I look at the cyber threat as I sit on the NASDAQ board and look at just the symbol of NASDAQ and what our cyber posture is ridiculous relative to what I might have assumed joining that board. You know, just the amount of, if you will, attempted intrusions occur, that's about the fact that our sectors have converged. And whether it's public or private sector, the threat level is higher. And quite frankly, the surface level of how much we're trying to cover is so much broader. Whether it be an electronic health record, our stock market, the Department of Defense in any instantiation. And so I think this issue of cyber, I've asked this question, and I asked this initially of President Obama, and then more recently of President Biden. One of the challenges for the private sector is we need to have a rallying cry that's bigger than any of our own companies that brings us together. We talked, Suja, about when do we bring cross industry together? If there's ever a rallying cry, it should be around the security of our critical infrastructure. And I've talked to Dr. Locasia, the head of NIST, who is the standard setter for our critical infrastructure within the Department of Commerce. We've got 16 and a half sectors of very critical infrastructure for this country that really our cyber posture is super fragmented. Our data, our ability to share data and understand multiple levels of security of data, super, super antiquated. And we've got pockets of excellence, but they don't come together. The private sector does not have a model of how to come together. The best I've seen is the Cyber Tech Accord that was about 4 years ago, when companies actually came together, let their proprietary, drama, left it at the door. And we said, what do we do for this country around a true cyber defense? But you almost need something bigger than any one private sector organization to convene that. It's a really tough thing. The United Nations did a phenomenal job years ago of bringing together some of the best tech companies in the world to take on human trafficking. We need something like that for cyber. This is the challenge that I think we are working through, which is we don't have a framework to come together and bring the best technology. Now, I happen to sit in a company that, again, is mission critical. We have national security, and we're working on some differentiators, some areas like multi-level security, that if we don't break through the understanding of how to bring different classification levels of data together, we can't get to a cyber defense. So there's some enablers that we are working on, and I'm hoping that we can get to a consortia even within what they call the aerospace and defense side of the world. But we have to have a framework that brings cyber in a better cyber defense, if you will, in a better construct than what we have now. And no part of government has been able to elevate that with an ask to the private sector that forces us out of our typical corporate boxes. So that's been an ask I've had, even asked for the Biden administration to consider a chief data officer for the country. Like, let's get to an executive level understanding that you can't keep parsing out technology in all these agencies and assume that we can get to a single frame. So these are the ways that we've got to push for consortia way of thinking on cyber. I think the private sector has some great answers to it. But again, look, I've been very excited about what NASDAQ has been doing on the fintech side of the world, but that's just one part of the answer. And right now, I think we've got a very real challenge. I worry very much about our higher ed institutions, our top, research institutions, medical research institutions. They are over the top on cyber attack right now. And so this is one where there's a political answer here. I hate to say it because nobody wants to say the P word, but we actually need the government, I think, to bring this one to bear, because private sector by itself, we won't come together. There's no method or mechanism to bring us together to align our capabilities. We just don't have that frame.
I am personally so glad that you are at this front seat. Some people listening to you, even before this more technical part of the conversation and more broad part of the conversation, when you were talking about getting to the top, and we've asked you that question in different ways, some people here sitting here listening to you and hearing your background may think, well, but that will never be for me. And one thing I wanted to touch on is, just kind of a quick reflection of my own. When George Floyd was murdered, you were the person I called. I sat up and quickly written my response that I wanted to put out. And I won't go through the whole details, but essentially what Toni said to me is, Coco, you can do better, like a great English teacher. And she just kept engaging with me to help me get my words right. And, you've been journaling. You began journaling on the subject of rare air. This is your terminology. And so speaking of rare air, only about 12% of public companies overall are led by African Americans. And as we know, you are one of only 2 Black women running Fortune 500 companies. This makes you a unicorn in tech terminology, but you resist that identification. You see thousands of Black women around you who could step into CEO and other executive roles. Why don't we as a society see what you see?
Well, look, we can say words like systemic racism. We can say things like unconscious bias. We can talk about, sort of our perspectives that are honed by our environment. But at the end of the day, it's why I find myself making sure when I respond to people, I'm trying to get the balance of appreciating myself in the role. And so many people will compliment me in some ways. And yet I want to also educate that there are so many people who look exactly like me who could absolutely be in this job and in so many other jobs. And so this idea of rare air is actually pulling from Michael Jordan. For those who know, that's kind of his language about how he gets above the rim in basketball. But I will tell you, when you're above the rim from a CEO perspective, Tasanda, the only other African-American CEO female CEO in the Fortune 500. She and I got a chance to connect at the Thurgood Marshall College Fund Gala, where I sit on the board. And, she gave me a hug and we just kind of spent a moment saying, I'm here for you. And you feel the sense of, why aren't there more people who look like us? What else can we do? If you take too much of that challenge on, you find yourself getting a little bit burdened by trying to answer and fix that problem on your own, when that problem is a systemic problem that can exhaust you if that is all you do. You've got to actually do the job. You've got to stand up in the role. I can tell you that, for example, when I first started SAIC, I've been super proud about the metric that you gave in terms of the Fortune 500. There's so many metrics that we could point to about the role of diversity in the boardroom as well. I was thrilled to have one of the most diverse boards in our industry, maybe the most diverse board in our industry at SAIC. My leadership team, I've been working and making some changes, but basically a fairly diverse leadership team. But I remember when I first stepped in, I started to ask questions because my briefings looked very similar, not because of the PowerPoint template, because who was in the room. Everybody looked about the same. And I said, wait a minute, what's going on here? And I remember someone saying, hey, I'm going to make some bold moves and be more diverse in my hiring. And it gave me an opportunity to coach. I was like, why is it bold to be diverse in your hire? Was it bold when we hired you? Let's just start there. See, even the wording can catch us. You can find yourself with people complimenting themselves for diverse hiring, like they're doing something beyond doing something for the company. So I find myself in positions of challenging even the thinking and the underlying intent, because a lot of times and again, you do it in a respectful way. I tend to I do it sometimes with humor. I do it sometimes with private moments, but we got to continue to challenge our thinking here. And this idea, I just can't find diverse talent. Oh, please check that. Please check that. When people say it, I usually try to have 5 or 6 sources ready. It's almost like I have little packages for the homeless. Anybody who's standing out in the middle of the street that's asking for some help, I have little packages ready in my car to put out in the window that, if it's cold, there's some gloves and scarves and all of that. The kids are always telling me, Mom, have packages ready. I always have some packages ready for people who have a very ignorant diversity and equity inclusion statement. I'm like ready with my package. Like, oh, you really can't find talent? Let me give you that. Coco, I mention your organization all the time. Because how do we not know? You're saying I need a diverse board. You're saying I need to work in this. You're saying you love tech talent. Do you know that the 5 or 6 sources for that around this country? So I don't have a lot of patience at this point to be someone's Sherpa all the time. Like, I'm not going to sit here and, hold the water for you. You've got to do your own work. But I am willing to have a little primer, a little package ready to say, let's ask ourselves, why are there 2 Black women in the Fortune 500? Why are there, Suja, I know you run an amazing organization of CIOs, CTOs, women who are at that level, C-suite, chief data officers. We know that tech is still very underrepresented at the CEO level. All of those women should have a platform for the CEO role, but sometimes they get pigeonholed as too tech. So they stay in a CTO role, or they don't get a P&L, or they don't get. So we've got to be really, really questioning. And every time we have a platform, share the mic if you need to. We've got to ask ourselves and challenge the people around us on their thinking and their rationale. And I think all of us can be part of that and improve upon that conversation.
One thing that you mentioned, that we talked about is you now have a different empathy for the CEO, being a CEO on a board, than you did when you had not been a CEO on a board. People want to know about your path to the boardroom, which we may have to leave for another time, but talk to us about the board from sort of that path to and perspective of, in kind of a quick way.
I got you. No, real quickly. Yeah, now having been on both sides of it, I only sit on one public board now because you can really only handle that with the CEO role. And I tease Adina Friedman, who is the CEO of NASDAQ. I sit on her board all the time. I now know how to ask questions on the board and questions to the CEO because I'm on the other side getting questions from the board. And so it does build a level of empathy of how much preparation goes into the board package, how much time is being spent. Even a small question from the board can ripple across a management team. And so just to be conscious of and intentional about the role the board is playing, how you stay in a governance level versus an operational level. It's just so easy to dive in. Most of the board members have been operational at some point. I've been that, and I know I dive in operationally from time to time. I'm more aware of it now that I'm on the CEO getting those questions. Look, I also think that is a skill set of managing your board that they don't talk about in CEO prep. You're thinking about managing the company, but you also have to learn how to manage your board. And that means you're a part of the board. You've got to participate. In some ways, you get out of body. You've got to be the CEO, but you also have to be a board member at the same time. And whether you're chair or not, whether you happen to have the chairman role or not, you've got to kind of be part of that team. That's a team you're on, and there's a team you lead. And the ability to move, you can't be defensive in your role as the CEO when you're on the board where the board is identifying really, really appropriate areas for focus. You can't then go defend that as the CEO. You got to be on that board. So I'm learning that managing your board and engaging with the board, I do board calls twice a year with each of the board members, being transparent. And I've spent a lot of time saying to the board, I'm going to show you how I think. It's not just you're going to get, here's what we're doing, but here's how we got here. And I'm finding that particular process has been super helpful with the board in showing them the evolution of our thinking and how we've outlined our strategy and our operating model. And I'm finding that has been what I now want as a board member, is that kind of disclosure, if you will.
Thank you so much. And one last question, because I think this is really important for all of us to reflect on. You and your husband have 5 children, 9 grandchildren, and some of your grandchildren have taken to calling you Mima CEO, which I absolutely love. And as you mentioned really early in the conversation, for 32 years, you've been holding a family meeting. Talk about being the CEO of the family and how each of us might learn about accelerating the path and success of our loved ones through the way we approach family management.
Look, I'm in a 4-generation family. My dad is my roommate. I've got my siblings, I've got my kids, and I've got my grandkids. I work from the outside in. My dad as he's aging, he's turning 90 in a few months. There's a tenderness that he gets and the grandkids get, and everybody in the middle gets squeezed. And I'm like, oh, forget the kids at this point, because the grandkids is a certain kind of love. I can't even describe that love that's so unconditional. I can go all day with the grandkids. So I tend to enjoy working the family like a portfolio in some ways. I'm always checking in. I do my weekly check-ins. I'm trying to encourage them to work across the levels. We were always raised this way, and I've worked on my children understanding they will have each other longer than they have their parents. The siblings will have each other. And so we're trying to build that kind of connectivity and safety net at each generation. I also am so thrilled to always bring my children, my grandchildren in the presence of my dad, because I'm seeing what it is as in the aging process to be able to connect your legacy down to your great-grands. My dad is a different human when his great-grandchildren are circling him and asking questions and learning about his role in the civil rights movement, so we document as much as we can his life as he's journaling so that they learn their history. So look, I've never believed in balance. It's more integration. I bring stuff to work. I bring work home. They call me Mima CEO. They don't even know what that means, other than they think maybe they'll get a gift or something. I don't think they really know what that means. They think I'm like the big boss, and they tell people my grandmother's the big boss. I don't think most of the little ones have no idea what that means. But I've enjoyed, they are aware that Mima that's the name they call me. And now the kids call me that too. But they're aware that Mima is doing something big for the country. That's how they understand it. And I try to help them understand why it's important to do something big for the country, and quite frankly, in their own lives, what it means for them to do something outside of just what benefits them personally. And so look, I feel like I'm always running a portfolio, whether it be at work or at home. There are days and weeks where it works out pretty well, that I'm pretty balanced. I try not to measure myself on anything but a monthly basis. On any given week, I really have a bad week. It goes too far in one direction or the other. On a month, I can get to parity. So I would ask you, if you're beating yourself up on, I didn't do enough at home or I didn't do enough here, stop measuring on a weekly or a daily. Just go for about a month, see how well you're doing. You know, you'll be nicer to yourself, grab a glass of wine, it'll be fine.